Welcome back to the Unprocessed podcast. I'm your host, Ben Johnston, and I am super excited to be joined today by Mark Majkrzak. I'm saying that right.
You are.
He's the founder of Rainwater. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for having us. We're excited to sit down and chat.
Yeah, me too. So let's just to kick it off, why don't you just start by going into a little bit of your origin story about Rainwater, how you got off the ground, how the concept came to be.
Yeah, so I founded Rain. Gosh, I guess it's been 6 years at this point. Rain is an aluminum bottled spring water. We bottle it at the source. I'm sitting in the bottling facility, so I'll apologize in advance for any background noise you hear. If you hear some machinery starting or some beeps, don't be alarmed. But I started my career, I went to school for mechanical engineering, and I went to go work as a consultant, an automation consultant for some very large, kind of the usual suspect bottlers. And my role was to go into a facility that was running at 1,800 PET bottles a minute, and we would find these little fringe operational improvements, generally that were low or no capital improvements, and take them to something like 1,850 or 1,900 bottles a minute. And so, I spent a lot of time inside of these big, high-speed commercial bottlers and witnessed at scale how much plastic we're using, and really kind of gained a appreciation for the plastic issue that I think most consumers don't have the opportunity or the luxury to understand.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess so you saw the issues with the plastic. Was there a lot of waste that you saw there, or was it more just the sheer volume of how much plastic you saw coming out of it?
The waste is functional of the product, right? If we're
Yeah,
recycling
built in.
as a populace, if we're recycling single-use plastics at 3 to 10% would be very generous.
Yeah,
Depending on the municipality, 10% would be an extremely generous figure to describe how much of our single-use PET we're recycling. So, of course, inside of any food manufacturer, there is some waste loss, operational loss that's going to happen, right? If we make a product and the bottle is not filled to 500 milliliters and it's 493 milliliters, right, we're probably going to scrap that product. And if
yeah,
obviously there's going to be some amount of loss occurring there, but it's the product that's leaving that's fit for consumption, that unfortunately does not have an afterlife, right? Once I drink my single-use bottle of PET water, it does not have a post-consumer place to go. And try as we may, as consumers, we're going to do our job. We put it into the blue bin. The truck comes along, it picks it up, it
yeah,
takes it to be sorted. Generally speaking, it's sorted for landfill or incineration.
yeah,
There was a time where China and other, I shouldn't say other, China and some developing countries were accepting the United States and other developed countries solid plastic waste, but a big treaty was signed about 5 years ago, and so that sort of put an end to that. And now the outcome again is landfill or incineration.
what were they using it for? Like to reuse in their own manufacturing, or?
They were at times. They some of these countries have some incineration plants that are generating electricity, as an example, which is not a terrible outcome, right? If you're cleaning the gases and the smoke that's being produced, and if you're scrubbing that air, it's not a terrible outcome for plastic waste. But more importantly, these developing countries have very low labor costs. And what that means is I can sort my single-use plastic water bottle from a single-use sports drink bottle, which sounds similar, but they have a slightly different composition in their plastic, and they
Yeah,
can't be treated as the same. And so when, if we sit here and think about the single-use plastic we interact with on any day, from when we open our eyes to when we go to sleep at night, we interact with hundreds, probably, maybe thousands of varieties of plastic that from a distance might look very similar, right? This one's clear and this one's clear, but they are different, right?
yeah,
They're material differences, and as a result, they can't be put in the same waste stream. They can only be downcycled if they're put in the same waste stream. And what that means is that the inherent load on the recycler to disseminate these into their appropriate waste stream is tremendous. And without low labor costs, it's an impossible system, which is why our domestic recycling rates are so incredibly low.
Yeah. So then I guess, so you saw this issue, and how did you come to aluminum as the solution for you
Yeah.
versus a glass or a paper or any alternative?
Sure. The cheap answer is that I was 21 years old and I enjoy Coors Light out of the same aluminum bottle, and I still do. Right? When I'm playing golf, it's a great package. The more responsible answer and kind of the more real answer is that I spent a lot of time understanding what materials actually have value on the post-consumer market, because if they don't have value on the post-consumer market, then as good as the input can be, as clean as the glass you can put in, if it's more affordable to make virgin glass out of sand, then the recycling rates are still going to have an issue. Aluminum, steel, as an example, right? These products are more expensive to make from virgin. It's more expensive to go and mine the ground for bauxite and convert that into aluminum than it is to take an aluminum can or aluminum bottle and melt it down and make an aluminum can or bottle. And so when the economics are that simple, right? If it costs 2 over here and it costs 1 over here, right? We have kind of a clear winner. And aluminum is the only format, kind of beverage packing format that is cost benefited to be recycled. It's also lightweight, right? We can take it to the beach. Glass has some challenges in that way. But I think glass is a great alternative. The good news about glass, its recycling rate is not very good, but it's not breaking down into millions and billions of pieces indefinitely. Right? Glass kind of sticks around, but it doesn't pollute, it doesn't contaminate, it doesn't turn into a byproduct. It's sand, right? It's silica at the end of the day. So we can pile up mountains of glass, which is unfortunate from a recycling perspective, but not so bad from a kind of an ecological perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think glass probably has a pretty high reuse rate. Like
it does.
My fiance is obsessed with keeping every jar that we ever get. There's definitely
we live in a small town in North Georgia where the bottling facility is, and someone downtown just opened one of these like refill shops, like bulk refill, right? Where you can go and get your bulk grains and bulk laundry detergents and bulk dish soaps. So now my wife, same thing. She goes and takes like our old pickle jars and refills them with loose pinto beans, and takes our old cleaning product bottles and fills them with shampoo, which is great. And all of those are glass. And admittedly, some of them are plastic. I think right now, like, we've been using the same Windex bottle for a year, and she goes and refills it with generic bulk Windex, and that's great.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So does that? So I mean, I think it would. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's not as easy to create from virgin, then I would imagine the initial cost on your end is a little bit higher. So I guess how does that translate to the end customer, and how do margins compare to something like a glass? Does the consumer end up paying more for your product than a glass?
Compared to glass, there is in fact some parity. Because glass is a better way to answer this question is compared to PET. Glass and aluminum both ship to the bottle filler, the beverage company, in this shape, right? We receive a pallet of 5,000 aluminum cans, 8 feet tall. We get 130,000 cans on a truck. Same for glass, right? If I was filling 16-ounce bottles of beer, they would come to me as glass bottles. In PET, I would, depending on how integrated I'm going to receive these little test tubes that we'd call preforms. And they're maybe 2 or 3 inches long, and they have the threads on the top of the bottle. They've already been injection molded with the threads. And they come in these big hoppers, we call them gaylords. And they go through a piece of machinery called a blow molder, right, where I grab them by the neck and I pump them full of air and I expand that little test tube into the shape of a familiar 16-ounce bottle. And so the inbound density, the shipping density of the package, of the format, is massively different. That's step one. So we get like probably, 4 or 5, maybe as many as 10 times the number of containers on a truck inbound to us as we would with an aluminum bottle or a glass bottle. So there's a big freight economy that we will never be able to realize. It would be very difficult for a beverage company to be both a can manufacturer and a and a beer company, and a soda company, and a bottled water company, because it's just the facility size is massive.
Yeah.
So there's some freight differences. The other obvious difference is just the material cost. This aluminum can costs us around 30 cents, plus or minus. A 16-ounce lightweight PET bottle costs 3 cents, costs 2 cents, costs 5 cents, right? So we're talking about 5 to 10 times the materials cost. So of course that translates to some discrepancy to the consumer. And I think gone are the days when a brand could very simply be sustainable, right? I think if the only thing you are is sustainable and you're equal or marginal at the product, I don't think sustainability sells, because unfortunately sustainability is often expensive, or more expensive than the commodity version of that thing. So I think it's really important that if you are going to be sustainable, like us, we're also putting a really good product inside of it, right? It's single source spring water from northeastern Georgia. We don't mess with the water, and I think that most brands that are either leading with sustainability or coming to the table with a version of sustainability are additionally coming with really high quality ingredients. They're organic, they're regenerative, right? They're pasture raised, and so suddenly you're able to defend your price discrepancy with not only this is aluminum, because consumers like low cost items.
For sure.
And they like good items as well, but I'm beating this horse, but sustainability alone I think just isn't enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we deal with a similar, not deal with, it's just kind of a market reality, is like we're selling sort of what you described at the end there. I mean, we're very local first, that's our whole ethos. So naturally the end cost to the user is going to be a little bit higher because the inputs are higher, it's a smaller scale, they're raised, pasture raised, like you said, grass fed, organic, like all the input costs are higher, so the end cost is going to be higher, but at the end of the day it's just a higher product, or it's a higher end product. It's not going to be for everyone, but you get what you pay for. I think it's especially important, like with water, just the packaging, and not just being sustainable, but tying in the health element to the packaging. It's like becoming so big nowadays, just because it's so far beyond the label when it comes to transparency nowadays that it's expected that you produce test results. It's expected that you pass your panels, not only just for minerals and stuff, but for VOCs and for microplastics and for this whole list of things, and it's all made so readily available. So I think that's another,
right?
Yeah,
and I think it should be entirely.
Yeah.
And it's about time that the food system has been challenged, because historically, big CPG has been able to operate behind this veil of secrecy that they would defend under the guise of intellectual property. But consumers should be able to ask a question, right, and get an answer. And the transparency in our food system, I think just in the last 12 months, we're beginning to see transparency in the food system that historically you were not entitled to as a consumer, and that's been unfortunate. So I think that there's a bit of an awakening happening, and CPG brands are kind of held to maybe not the authority of regulatory bodies, but the authority of the consumer, which is probably better.
Yeah, no, for sure, because there's not that pressure, the negative pressures from the regulatory bodies. So do you see, I guess, I have a few directions I want to go with it, but I guess in terms of food system just as a whole, something we get not pushback on, but question on is like scalability, at least for our model. And we can address it, we have a plan for it, but for the water industry, what does that look like 10, 15 years from now? Like, is there a world where we eliminate plastic packaging or single-use plastic bottles? Is there a world where we can bring down the input costs low enough so that the average or the lower end consumer who wants the 48 pack of cheap PET water bottles, which is fine, but is there a world in which that can all be replaced by aluminum and glass or something else more sustainable?
I don't, unfortunately, I don't believe there is. it's first important to understand what's happened to the PET bottled water industry over the last 10 or 15 years. It's massive consolidation and a race to create the most commoditized, lowest cost, highest volume package available, right? That 48 pack, you can walk into Walmart, any Walmart in the 50 states, maybe not Alaska or Hawaii. You walk into the 48 states Walmart and buy a 48 pack of PET bottled water for like $3.98. And it's incredible. We sell a 24 pack at retail for like $35. And so again, there's my 10X that I was talking about earlier. And those input costs are all over the place. The big bottled water companies are operating 10 to 25 facilities across the United States that are using municipal water that they're cleaning up with reverse osmosis and chemically adding back calcium and magnesium and potassium. But their distance to the customer is much shorter, so their freight costs are inherently less. I already described how the input, raw materials, the input COGS are dramatically different. And then the negotiations at the retailer level, because they have such volume, right? The retailer's willing to accept really compressed margins on what is generally a high margin category. If we talk about center store, these margins are oftentimes much better than produce, right? The retailer might operate at a 30% margin or a 35% margin, or maybe 25% margin. We get in the perimeter of the store and those margins get compressed very, very small. With the highest volume, there we go. With the highest volume bottled water companies, right, they've been able to negotiate these retailer margins to be fractions of what they should be kind of for the category. And again, we're just kind of artificially forcing the competition to have a leg up. I would love to believe that there was a future where that stuff goes away. I don't think there is. I think what Rain should do and what our competitors should do and we are doing is just try to make a case for a sustainable alternative that admittedly is going to cost more than what you're used to and compete with the mid-market brands and the premium brands, and displace some portion of that. But more importantly, I think educate a consumer that there are package formats that maybe are different than what they've been used to, and get out of this siloed way of thinking that bottled water has to come in a PET bottle when it can come in glass, and it can come in a box, and it can come in an aluminum bottle. And all of these products have their own challenges, right? Aluminum is expensive, glass is heavy, Tetra Pak boxes have really low recycling rates, but all of them are not single-use plastic. Right. And so, again, it would be really difficult to displace big water. And I think big, I hate to call it big water, but it feels, I don't know. Anyways, I think that we're going to show even the big guys that an alternative package is possible, and we're going to see more and more products, water or otherwise, come in aluminum bottles or glass bottles or some alternative format. And if ultimately that means we can drive consumption of single-use plastic down, I would call that a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I do think there's still a significant share of the market to be
totally
won over from the plastic side. It's not, obviously there's always going to be a segment of the population that is drinking it out of necessity, but I think there's a large, I think I lost your audio.
Sorry, there we go.
There you go. There's a large portion, I think, that just have been habituated on it, of just drinking our plastic waters, even though they can afford a different alternative. I think there's definitely hope for bringing down the amount that's consumed on the plastic.
And ultimately, we as a brand in the business of selling bottled water will tell any consumer that refilling their bottle at their tap at home is the absolute best thing they can do. 99.999% of U.S. consumers live in a municipality that has clean, safe drinking water, and they don't need to buy bottled water. And and there is always a time and place for bottled water. If you're traveling, if you're going to an event, if you're at the airport, right, you forgot your hydro flask at home, and Rain wants to support those opportunities. And for those consumers of ours who don't drink their tap water and want to drink Rain, of course we're going to support that. But we will tell any consumer that they should drink from the tap, because your tap water is generally clean and safe. And maybe there's some fluoride, and maybe that means you need to get a charcoal filter on your countertop. But these are low cost ways that you can clean up your own tap water and have water that is as safe and clean as anything else.
For sure. And if they're reusing their Rain, I mean,
Totally.
they're not going and picking up a water bottle, plastic water
Yep.
bottle, which can
Yep.
be the convenient option. So going back a little bit more to your origin, so you sort of set the stage of what your product is, why it's different. So I guess how did you get started as a 21-year-old? Like how did you get that message out? Because I think glass has been the more common sustainable alternative for a little bit longer. I guess what was your strategy for going to market? Did you start online? Did you start brick and mortar? How did you get the
Yeah.
message out there?
Yeah. The first thing we had to do was find a place that some contract bottler could put water into an aluminum bottle for us, which at the time did not exist. Fortunately, we found this little tiny brewery on the top of a mountain in Montana that was putting microbrews, IPAs, and kind of like craft beers inside of this. And they were selling that generally to like the river rafting community.
Sure.
And the river rafting community liked their beer in this because they can put the cap back on their beer and they can go
Yep.
through a rapid, and then when they're done with the rapid, they can drink their beer. And they're brewing that beer with really great water from the mountains of Montana. And so we developed a relationship with this brewery to got them to fill water on that same brewing equipment and brewing bottling lines, and make our first production runs of the product. And we signed a deal with a music festival in San Diego, and we thought, oh man, this is the big break. And we've got this music festival, there's 50,000 consumers, and they're all going to be drinking Rain. And ignorantly, I believe, they're all going to go home and buy a case online. And we're just like, it's done, over, we figured it out. This is a masterclass. How we learned, right? We spent all these marketing dollars. We paid a massive sponsorship fee. I was maxing out my 401k and refinancing my house to try to make all this work. Yeah. And we did the music festival, and it was like, I don't know, we probably got a dozen e-commerce orders, if that. But what we did do was get a distributor in San Diego to take on the product and start distributing it in and around San Diego. And he went into a couple little regional grocery stores, and they started doing pretty well. And then we started to learn about food service. And at the time, I didn't understand how our food system works, that there's this on-premise channel, and then there's the off-premise channel, which would be like brick and mortar grocery store, Kroger and Safeway and Publix. And then on-premise being food service, hospitality, catering, cruise, these kind of two distinct categories of the business. And when I started the company, I was like, if you're a CPG brand, you've got to go to retail. If Kroger's not selling your product, you've got a huge problem. If Albertson's not selling your product, you have a huge problem. You got to get into Costco and Walmart. And we spent a lot of time and money trying to, work through that flywheel without a bunch of success. And I don't know why my headphones, sorry, they're just like...
You're good. I haven't lost your audio.
Okay, good. Sorry. Okay, all right, let me try one thing. All right, sorry about that. So, we thought that retail was the channel of trade that you had to go into, and again, spent time, money, effort, hired brokers, paid slotting fees, paid retailer promotions, and couldn't convince a consumer to pay 10 times what he's used to paying for his bottled water. So again, money poorly spent. But about that time is when we started to really understand this food service on-premise vertical. And what we found is that, big Fortune 5, Fortune 1000 businesses all have some sustainability initiative, and all of them have in there some section that says by 2030 we're going to divert 80% of our single-use plastic to alternative packaging materials. And that's true of the hotels of the world, of the cruise lines of the world, of the huge office, Meta, Facebook, Apple. They all have a version of this initiative. And, in walks Rain with a bottle of water that doesn't come in plastic. And suddenly we can displace like 50% of their single-use plastic like that. We also have this kind of like immediate sampling opportunity where the product is kind of forced upon the consumer at his office, and we don't have to convince that consumer through traditional marketing means. We don't have to ask him to get online and buy a 24-pack for $40. He can be served it, he can fall in love with it, and then he can go seek it out. We don't have to pay Facebook ads and digital marketing, right, and all these things. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, we found that food service has been this channel that's been really beneficial to us. And we kind of took a step away from retail during that time because, again, we weren't willing to spend the money on the retail programs and the slotting fees and the brokerage relationships. And now, for about the last 12 months, we've kind of gotten back into retail in a more significant way. And now we've got a consumer base that goes and finds our product at the grocery store. They'll drive 20 minutes out of their way to the grocery store on the other side of town that carries Rain, because we've got some loyalty, right? We've got some consumers who are genuinely seeking out the brand and want to go to the retailer that has the brand, which we're grateful for those consumers.
Yes, that's smart. I mean, you hear all the time. Like B2C is more fun, but B2B is what pays the bills. But it's a good way to start and gain, because you were able to get in front of your target demo. I mean, people who work at Fortune 500 companies would be your perfect demographic. And you get to sell in bulk, wholesale versus individual. That's awesome. So let's see. Going back to the testing component, because I think that's super important, and I've been seeing just everywhere lately. Have you seen that Oasis app?
Yeah.
I just downloaded the other day and I was playing around with it. And it's such a, like you said, it's so important. So how do you guys? How do you do that? Do you guys test? Do you test at the source? Do you test after it's been sitting in your package? Like, I guess how does that look for you guys?
Yes to all of that. So as a bottled water company, once a year we're required to complete what we call Title 21, which is a really comprehensive water quality analysis, and it's checking everything from radon and radiologicals to organic and inorganic compounds, mineral content, simple things like dissolved solids, how much mineral content is in the water, pH, the potential of hydrogen. It is this, it's about a 40-page report when we get it back with, I don't know, it's got to be a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 line items that we're testing for. And incredibly comprehensive. And most of these have a standard set by the FDA. And Oasis, very familiar with Oasis, their version of the standard is not always exactly what the FDA's version of the standard is. Maybe it's more stringent than what the FDA would deem as as safe and potable. But there is a standard set forth by the FDA. And enforced generally by the local regulatory body, in our case the Department of Agriculture in the state of Georgia, who generally operate at the leisure of the FDA depending on what state you're in. And so once a year we complete that test, we send it off to the state, they review it, and they send us back kind of you're good to operate for the next 12 months report. And so that would be the kind of the highest level of testing. Daily inside of our own facility, we complete a E. coli, coliform, total plate count, which is kind of a indication of the bacterial load in the water, the number of colony forming units that under the right circumstances, i.e., e.g., warm, available carbohydrates, right, and oxygen, how many of these could populate and turn in and colonize? E. coli, coliform, TDS, pH, temperature, fill volume, yeast and mold. I think I've got those covered. So we do that in-house daily, twice a day. And then finally, weekly, with a third party, we ship out a sample to a third party lab of the raw water, unprocessed, unfiltered, untreated. And again, they do their own TDS, E. coli, coliform, yeast and mold analysis, just to confirm that the water we're shipping out is clean, safe, and potable. We also keep what we call a retention sample from every hour of production, so that if there is some concern, right, or some complaint, we can go and pull a bottle that was bottled 11 months ago and do some analysis on it, right, to ensure that it is kind of within our own specifications of potability.
Interesting. So is it common? I saw that you have that report on your website. How common is it for companies to post that full report?
You're required to post that. Many bottled water companies don't post it willingly. You're also required on your bottle to provide either a phone number and email address where a consumer can pick up the phone or send an email and get a copy of that water quality report. I don't know if there's a rule on how quickly a bottled water company must divulge that information. I expect there is. Ours is public facing, so when we get that email, we just send them right back to our website with a link, and here it is, Mr. Consumer. And I would speculate that there's a certain group of bottled water companies who don't understand the regulation, and it's not that they're withholding the information, they just might not know that they're sort of required to have this available on the website. And then there's certainly a group of bottled water companies who have, some test figure on their water quality report that likely is within the FDA limits, but probably above what a consumer might believe is appropriate. We can use nitrate as an example, a byproduct of fertilizer and livestock. And when we find nitrate levels going up, we find consumers begin to kind of turn their nose a little bit in concern. The FDA standard for nitrate, I think, is 4 milligrams per liter, in that range, and that arguably is kind of on the high side, but that's the standard by the FDA. And so if you had a nitrate level of 3.9, and I might have these numbers wrong, but if you had a nitrate level of 3.9, you might not want to show that off if you're a bottled water company.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So when it comes to the contaminants, do you run into issues with source contamination at all? Because something I was thinking about is like the water, because like the water cycle and like all of our waterways it's kind of inevitable. Like there's microplastics, there's contaminants. So do you see long term, do you see that getting worse, and do you see us having to move towards reverse osmosis and remineralization as a better standard than spring source? Do you think it'll get to that point, or is it naturally, I guess, cleaning enough, self-cleaning, I guess, to avoid that?
Fortunately, I think that the EPA has done a great job of limiting what big manufacturers can dump and what kind of byproducts we can have as a function of our manufacturing. And we're beginning to understand PFAS and these forever chemicals that are very persistent and don't break down in ultraviolet and don't break down in temperature and don't break down really under any circumstances. Before the EPA and other regulatory bodies kind of got a hold of these, we'd find big chemical manufacturers kind of wasting their effluent water on the lawn behind their manufacturing plant. Yeah. And that lawn was near a creek, and that creek flowed into a lake, and that lake dumped into an ocean, and suddenly we've contaminated the whole thing with PFAS or Teflon. And thankfully now I think the EPA has done a really good job of forcing these waste effluent products to be managed and be cleaned up, and the fines and the repercussions for polluting are very severe. And that's not to say that companies aren't out there still doing this. Of course they are.
Right.
I think they're doing less of it, and I think that many of them are trying and making effort to limit what their effluent is and what their where their effluent water goes. That said, we're fortunate. Our spring source is in rural Georgia. We're 2.5 hours north of Atlanta, which puts us about 2.5 hours from any major city, and any major industry also. And what that means for us is that there is very little kind of human developed, human derived contamination that surrounds the spring source. It's also our spring is located in one of the rainiest counties in the United States, and our name Rain is kind of an ode to that. And what the rainfall means is that the system, the watershed, is constantly traveling underground and constantly sort of recharging this spring and constantly forcing water out because new water is coming in. And you asked about this earlier, is it kind of self-cleaning? It absolutely is, right? Because when this water is infiltrating the crust of the earth and passing through these really dense rock formations, we're filtering it down, we're imparting calcium and magnesium and potassium and iron and all these trace minerals into the water on its way through the earth before finally it would come back up as a spring or as a well, right? If you were bottling from a well.
Yeah.
And so, maybe it's like a evergreen answer to say that there will always be safe, clean sources of water, and I hope there are. But I suppose things could get really out of control and we could damage, all of our clean drinking water.
Yeah.
We'd be in a world of hurt when that happens.
Right. I mean, it sounds like we're on like the right path. I was just curious if it was going down or if it's trending up, and it seems like it's trending in the right direction.
I think it is trending in the right direction. Like I brought up Teflon, and I don't know the name of the movie, but there's like Hollywood's made movies about Teflon.
Dark Matter, I think.
Yeah, Dark Matter, exactly. And the cows get sick and the children get sick. And you find out that it's Teflon because Dow or DuPont or whoever it is dumping their effluent water into the creek. Again, like if not the regulatory supervision, the ego and audacity for a company to just like waste their Teflon water in a creek, like you've got to be a certain kind of bad person to do that. Yeah, certain kind of evil. Yeah.
So at the source, how does so you're bottling in your facility here? Is your facility like right next to the spring? Like how does that work? What is bottled?
About 100 yards from the spring.
Okay. So how does it come into your facility?
Yeah, bottled at the source. Our version of bottled at the source, we think, is about as pure of a term as we could get. I think that term is abused often. I know firsthand that there are spring water companies who have a pipeline 3 miles to the source up on the top of a hill, right, and pipe it down from the hill. And so, like, where at what distance are you no longer at the source? I don't know the answer to that question. It's not a regulated term. In our case, I'm like 100 yards from the source. I could walk out the front door of the bottling facility and make my way over to the spring source. Here at this facility, this was a bottled water company before we bought this facility. Went out of business in the early 2000s. But in the early 80s, they set up a small PET bottled water company here. And there was a spring that used to run in the pasture, and that spring would come to the surface of the earth, and it would kind of drain down a creek. And the story is that the previous landowner was like, hey, I've got all this good water coming out of the ground, maybe we should bottle it. So they developed a very simple catchment. They buried perforated pipe underground, and so that water that used to make its way to the grass line, they buried perforated drain pipe about 14 feet underground, and now water wants to find the path of least resistance, so it makes its way into this perforated drain pipe, and then with gravity we flow it into an underground storage tank, and then we pump it up into the bottling facility. There's a little bit of elevation change, and so we've got to pump it into the bottling facility. Yeah. But in our case, it very much is bottled, what we would call bottled at the source. In the spring, I said this earlier, that consumers should be entitled to information and transparency. We welcome anyone to come in the front door, and if they'll put a hairnet on and they've got closed-toed shoes, we're going to give them a tour of the facility, and we'll show them the spring. and we'll show you everything because we don't have anything to hide. And there's not a gotcha moment. If a machine breaks while they're here, it's going to break. Like, and that's the nature of manufacturing. And so I think that transparency is important. But where I was headed is that in our case, once we bring it into the facility, we treat it very minimally. We use a 5 and a 1 micron filter, just a simple cellulose-based filter that removes visible particulate, right? Spring water comes out of the ground, kind of like swimming pool clear, like crystal clear. But it does have some larger suspended solids, like pieces of sand and red clay, right? Because this natural water is coming out of the ground. And so, of course, we want to filter out that visible particulate, which would be the 5 micron filter. And then 1 micron is just below the visible spectrum, but not small enough to change the chemistry of the water, like what a reverse osmosis filter would do. And so we're removing visible and invisible particulate, but again, not small enough that we're removing dissolved solids, the dissolved iron and the dissolved magnesium from the water. And so chemically, if we walk out to the spring and I take this bottle here and we send them to a lab or we do it in our own lab, they're chemically the same. And that's sort of a requirement of spring water, right? One of the spring is a regulated term, and one of the things that it must be is chemically the same at the spring as it is in the package.
Okay.
And,
So like
and otherwise,
sifting it mostly. You're not like
exactly.
Really,
Exactly. Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess getting away from water a little bit, what are some brands and some companies right now that you admire, that you're sort of, I guess, in the sustainability space in terms of helping the food system and similar mission, I guess. Yeah. What are some companies that you've been seeing recently?
Yeah. One of Rain's sales guys, he has a son that works for a company called Stellar Snacks that makes pretzels, kind of like a Dots pretzel. And I don't like. Admittedly, I don't know that they're on the sustainability charge, but they are on the do it yourself, manufacture it yourself, hire good people, make a really good product. You don't have to kill it with marketing or marketing spend. Just make good things that people want. And as a result, Stellar Snacks has been absolutely on fire. They're on board Southwest Airlines, which I'm sure has been a huge windfall for them, and so I congratulate them for that. They're annihilating it in retail. I think they just built a new 200,000 square foot manufacturing facility to support their own manufacturing of their products. So I'm excited to see that happen, because as far as I understand, this is kind of like a made from nothing company that's turned into something very substantial, which is hard to do. Recently, my wife has been obsessed with ice cream for bears, and I think that they've got really high quality ingredients and honey and not artificial sweeteners. They're probably not using any colors. And I think it's just
we've got them on our site too. Yeah,
awesome.
They're the best.
Awesome. Yeah. And so those are both kind of snack food products.
No, I think you're.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say your point on Stellar is, I think it's an important point, because it's there's a consumer for everything, and reshaping the food supply, it's really decentralizing it and localizing it, and so the more the companies own their own manufacturing and own their distribution, that's cutting out 2 to 3 layers of middlemen if you're own manufacturing and distribution. So that's it's really what we need. It's not necessarily, not everybody's looking for an ice cream for bears type, when it comes to ingredients and stuff like that. So I think it's important.
And I totally agree, because there has been so much consolidation in our food system. Because that's just kind of the private equity and venture capital model, is that we consolidate, and we raise earnings, and we make the product worse, and we cut corners where we can. And out of the other side, we have a bunch of filler-based sludge that we're kind of required to eat as Americans. And that's problematic for sure. I also believe that there's going to be more and more examples of really intentional produce. Produce right now generally isn't branded. And in certain examples it is, right? I can get like my spinach from, the branded manufacturer of spinach, and I can Driscoll's, raspberries.
Sure.
But I think that, there are these huge, corporations making the produce, and I expect that there is going to be some perimeter foods, produce specifically, that are held or operated at a higher standard, and maybe a standard even higher than organic. Organic versus conventional is kind of the talking basis we have today. But will there be like an organic plus or an organic regenerative raspberry? And is that raspberry better? I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I talk about it all the time. That's like the one area in the grocery store where there is no transparency beyond that. That's just organic conventional. You don't know anything about actually how it was grown aside from the organic standards, which nobody really knows. So yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's a big differentiator of ours, is that layer of transparency. When it comes to the produce, you can see the farm that it came from, their regenerative, no-till, whatever their processes are. It's a new standard. And that's interesting too. I don't know if you saw, there's a CPG company that just raised like $200 million at a $1 billion valuation selling blueberries. It's a big company. I forget the name of it.
What are they called? Joyful?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. Yeah. But that's just, I think that goes to your point there, that there's a lot more innovation in that space.
We've already seen it happen in in meat. I think beef for sure, and chicken, and these meat products. There are many farms who are grass-fed and finished, and that they are pastured, and that they are using feeds that meet some criteria that isn't the traditional criteria. And what they're able to do, obviously, is demand a price per pound that's dramatically different than the conventional price per pound. And I think we're finding more and more kind of branded commodities, branded beef, that historically didn't exist.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's starting at the smaller local level, because when you do it right like that, when you're regenerative produce, when you're grass-fed beef, you can't scale to a certain degree, like as an individual farm. So it's really hard to make you could build your brand, but it kind of has a cap, which is good. That's kind of like what that kind of product is supposed to be. But the more that becomes viable, the more people are incentivized to do it themselves. And then instead of having one conglomeration that makes all the grass-fed beef under their brand, you've got 150 to 1,000, whatever, small farms making that product within their brand, which is just better for everybody, consumer and producer.
Agreed.
Cool. So we're 47 minutes. Do you have anything that you want to add about your company or about us? Or yes. Give you the floor for a minute.
Yeah. So when I was poking around your guys' website, and one of my colleagues, Chris, kind of made this introduction in the very beginning a couple of months ago. What's your plan? I saw that there are some new markets and geographies that you're going to go after, and would the goal be that each geography has its own version of local?
Yeah. So it's kind of skilled local essentially. So right now we started in West Michigan and the Michigan Lakeshore, as well as Chicago. That's sort of our first test region. It's like our pilot region, and then we're going to open it up a little bit larger in the Midwest to cover most of Michigan, east side to Detroit, up to Traverse City. But essentially it's a warehouse model. So where we have a fleet of temperature controlled delivery trucks. And a central warehouse. So basically, the customer orders from a number of local vendors and CPG companies that we wholesale, like Rain or Masa or Jacob or Ice Cream for Bears, anything like that. So we want to be like a grocery store replacement that has an emphasis on local. So essentially, a customer will place their order. We'll drive in our trucks to all the farms and put the order together in our warehouse, pack it, and then we'll deliver it right to the customer. Awesome. We also have lockers that are coming soon, self-service, temperature-controlled lockers, so consumers can come and it's more flexible. It's a cheaper delivery option.
It's like a CSA that's delivered to your house.
It's like a CSA, but it's fully customizable, and you can get all your groceries. So it's like you could shop from you can do your normal grocery shopping, but all your produce is local, organically grown. Your meat is local, pasture raised from West Michigan. So it's more nutritious. It's better for your community. It tastes better. It's fresher, especially on the produce. 'Cause the produce, even the highest end stuff from Whole Foods, organic, whatever, it's coming from thousands of miles away. It's picked before it's ripe. Traveled in a truck for a month. So it's just not it's lost all of its nutrients really. So yeah, that's sort of our model essentially, and then
So how do you handle the inherent seasonality of produce, especially in
yeah,
the Midwest?
yeah,
Right?
in the Midwest, that's kind of like our we picked the spot that has the biggest challenges, which is
Yeah,
good. But so there are a number of common produce items that we can have all winter here, like anything that's cold storage available. So
sure. Root
yeah, potatoes,
vegetables.
yeah, all the root vegetables, apples, so
Yeah,
all those things. So we can have those. We also do have like non-seasonal produce available, um, and it's clearly labeled, so it's just like
sure. Yeah,
not for outside the Midwest.
yeah.
And then we have an emphasis again wherever we can have a local SKU, we have it replaced of the other thing. So we want to keep, and that's another thing is like how do local producers stay afloat during the winter months as well.
Agreed.
So
Yeah,
what we have is a full suite offering, so that even if during the winter the SKUs are narrowed down to root vegetables and then whatever you can grow in a greenhouse, which is greens and some other things. Um, People are still compelled to support local all year round because there's
yeah.
also everything else that they would want from a grocery store on our platform. So that's kind of our strength is logistics and tech. Obviously, there's local is what like we're rooted in, and that's our ethos. But unlike some similar concepts that connect farmers to consumers, we really want to compete with. We want to compete with Instacart. We want to compete with the
Yeah.
premier grocery delivery platforms so that it can be a no-brainer for everybody, and that helps everyone in the end, including the producers.
Agreed. I mean, and to your point, like, it, is it the the best possible thing that I can get a perfectly red strawberry in December in Georgia? Like,
Right.
is that a good thing? I don't know. I have an
No.
opinion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, there's
It's like, so
obviously,
maybe we should
yeah,
refine our choices based on the seasons.
exactly, and yeah, there's obviously there's benefits to eating seasonally from a
Yeah,
nutrition standpoint, but also like those what you get at the grocery store, like those strawberries, you bite into it and it's white. It tastes like
yeah,
water.
yeah.
There's no
Very
nutrients in
terrible.
it. Like you could do a side by side test of a local strawberry versus a grocery store strawberry, and it's like
Yeah,
it's night and day in taste, but also in nutrition. So
yeah,
yeah, so to your point, like that model is that we're able to scale that. So if we were to open, say in Georgia where you are, or Tennessee, we would have a central location,
hmm,
central warehouse, and then we would have our own suite of vendors within that region, and then servicing pilot cities. So if we had a Nashville hub, we would have a locker and a delivery zone
yeah.
in Austin or wherever across within like 100-mile radius. So yeah, so that's our plan for growth there.
Is that why fruit has like, I feel like in my own lifetime I can remember where like peaches were always really good, and now I go to the grocery store and get a peach and it's like generally not good. And I live in
Yeah,
Georgia, the peach state, so the peaches should be great. But
right.
they came from California. They didn't even come from Georgia.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yep.
so they were, to your point, they were picked when they were green on the tree, and
Mhm.
then they ripened in a warehouse for 3 weeks, and then they got put on a truck and shipped to me. And so, like,
Yeah.
the peach I'm eating is a California peach picked 2 months ago.
And that's why it goes bad so quickly. That's why your produce molds so much quicker when you go to the grocery store. But yeah, that point is perfect because we say that all the time. Like West Michigan, where our hub is, it's called Zeeland, Michigan. It's like even further west than Grand Rapids. But like that area is like the best spot in the country for apples. And you go to the grocery store and the apples are from Chile. And like you
Yeah,
can't. It's really difficult to get apples from that were grown right next to you by your neighbor. So we're trying to eliminate that because there's just inefficiencies that don't need to exist. Like for that apple from Chile to be cheaper and easier for you to access, there are 10, not 10. There's like 3, 4, 5 middlemen in between that make it harder. Whereas we can just sell directly from the farmer to the consumer, and it's better all around.
Good. Well, I wish you luck.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but thank you. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you
Yeah.
taking the time.
Thanks for having us on, and I hope that hope we talk again. But in the meantime, enjoy your strawberry-less winter.
Yeah, thank you. It just started snowing here, so it's
All
beautiful.
right. Good.
All right, have a good one, Mark.
Thanks, man.